is extremely practical, and I get it. The idea here is, man, find your demographic, cater to your demographic,
Yep.
and that's the easiest way to do it. It's extremely pragmatic. I don't think it's biblical. And let me be careful to say I don't think every church should be diverse. I think every church should look like its community.
Welcome to A Theology of Hustle. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, and follow me at Theology of Hustle on Instagram. Now, let's get to work. Well, Pastor Bryan Loritts, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. It's great to meet you.
Well, it's good to be here with you, and we can drop the pastor.
Okay.
Just call me bishop or apostle.
Okay.
Or,
I
or
can handle that.
doctor or reverend. No, call me Bryan. Call me Bryan.
Sounds good. I appreciate that. Yeah, so let's go ahead and kick off, and maybe you could give us the quick rundown, who you are, what you do, the quick bio.
Yeah, Bryan Loritts, follower of Jesus, grew up in a wonderful Christian home with two parents who definitely were not perfect people, but just really modeled what authentic Christianity looks like. Within the covenant of marriage, they just celebrated, 54 years of marriage, still
That's awesome.
faithfully following Jesus. I'm extremely blessed. I've been married to Corey for 26 years, the father of Quentin, who's 24, Miles, who's 22, and Jaden, who's 20. So that's the stuff that really matters. Teaching pastor at a church here in the Raleigh-Durham area, the Triangle. We've got a few campuses. I've written a few things, and but yeah, that's the brief rundown.
Yeah, I appreciate you going through all that. You're a man who wears many hats, it seems, and I love that. I would love to just kind of start out and maybe just explore a little bit of your story. I think stories a really important thing, and watching what God does through our stories is a really important part of who we are. So I know you grew up in the church. Do you mind kind of talking through like growing up as a PK and some of that?
Yeah, so I get the assumption. My dad was an evangelist when
Okay.
I grew up. He switched over to the lead pastor, senior pastor role in 2005, well after I had left the house. In fact, what's weird about that is when he became a pastor, he was asking me for advice on pastoring because I was a couple years into senior pastor, lead pastor. So that might sound trite, but it's a pretty major distinction because I didn't grow up with the week in, week out pressure that a PK would feel. My dad was only at our church a handful of Sundays out of the year. I mean, just being, who the Lord had gifted him to be, invitations to preach other places were pretty frequent. So even though I missed my dad a lot, um, I just didn't grow up under in the church, in the local church, that pressure. So I think that's good to hear. However, being the son of what some would say is a prominent Christian leader, although I love it. One of my friends say it's so ridiculous, the celebrity culture among Christian leaders. What's his line? It's Matt Chandler. Matt Chandler said something along the lines, because we're sitting there eating in Birmingham, and somebody comes over. Oh my gosh, I want to take pictures with you, Matt Chandler. And Matt was nice, and then he just turns to me after they leave and says, "Sometimes I feel like I've won the tallest horse contest in a miniature horse kind of thing." It's, people make us big, which is just the most ridiculous thing. So I was sensitive to that when I became a pastor, full-time vocational ministry. And my church knew if you wanted to trigger me, hold my kids to a standard that you wouldn't hold your kids to.
It's good.
So, I remember one time Sunday school teacher right after service marches up to me. I think our youngest Jaden, who's just this uber extrovert, thought it would be cool during Sunday school to stand on top of one of the tables and do the Michael Jackson Billie Jean dance, which is so not appropriate. And he needed to be corrected. But the way in which she kind of said it was something along the lines of no pastor's son should. And again, I just had to draw a hard line and say, yes, it's not a good idea for a 6-year-old to do the Billie Jean dance. But let's not hold them to another standard. So I wanted my kids to have freedom. And last thing I'll say, and I know there's probably more than what you're asking. Um, you know, when my kids were in student ministry, I knew that they were processing some real issues they had with me and their mother with their youth pastor. And everything within me wanted to try to subtly police that. And I just felt the Holy Spirit just smacking my hands, just going, your kids need safe places to process stuff, and you're a part of that stuff. And so back off. And so it's been a fun journey with them.
Yeah, that's cool. No, I had no expectations for what I was getting, so all of that is perfect. It's interesting you talk about the celebrity pastor culture. I'm a pastor. I've been a pastor for 15 years, but I've always been in smaller churches. Been in churches where you load a trailer at the end of service.
Yep.
I always said it's
Yep.
hard to get full of yourself when you have to go put speakers in a trailer after you
Yep.
preach.
Yep.
It's interesting as you've gone about your career, and I know you've been on big stages, kind of written books. I think I remember hearing you speak at some of these conferences and stuff. I mean, how have you, I guess, navigated some of that in your own work?
Yeah. I don't know. I think there is a it's an interesting cocktail. There's a splash of what I'd like to believe is humility in there. There's a splash of um, I'm a little unique. I'm a second generation preacher, pastor who grew up um, in a home where my dad had stood on some pretty big stages. I mean, my dad was a part of the Promise Keepers thing back in the day, and 70, 80,000 men would pack. Um, and a lot of guys who were in my situation, I mean, the war stories are just abundant. I was just blessed that my dad's just a humble guy. Like he would come back and mom would tell him take the trash out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
His house, the house I grew up in, was a really simple. I don't even think it was 2,000 square feet. I think they may have paid. I, they paid less than what some people pay for their cars today, and by that I mean like a Chevy Tahoe. Dad drove beat up. We had a Volkswagen something that was an embarrassment to get picked up in. Like the stage persona of my dad, if you just hung out, you would just go normal guy. You would and so dad's thing was um you better not ever act like a diva.
Mhm.
And I remember one time I said something to the cleaners we used to go to, and I was like home from college, and I said something along the lines of, "Are y'all going to be able to get that? This is really important to me." And Dad was so embarrassed, and so he was just really big on humility, and not just what he said, but how he modeled it. Um, and of course I'm human, so but I didn't get into ministry. On one hand, ministry did look like, okay, I know it has this big kind of thing to it.
Mhm.
And so there was that pressure of, yeah, I think I'm just always battling if I don't accomplish Crawford Loritts size stuff. There's this little voice in the back of my head, which is not the Holy Spirit saying you are a failure. Um, but on the other hand, he gave me just the incredible gift of humility and being normal. I talked to my best friend earlier today. My best friend is one of 16 kids, grew up in the projects, but my dad, he lived with us. He's like my brother. Like our running joke is when my parents die, he's probably in the will. And so my parents, the breadth of their friendships and relationships, Bill Bright, the founder of Crew, could be over the house. And then this guy who grew up in the projects, they're leaving an extra plate out too. So I the older I get, the more I appreciate that, and the more I try to emulate those those kinds of things. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's good. I appreciate you talking about that. I know it's one of those things that I mean, ministry is that way in so many ways. Like unless you have done it for an extended period of time, it's hard to know what it's like to be in ministry. How people talk to the people in ministry a lot of times, and even if you're periphery like elder board or something, it can still be hard to understand the day to day of what ministry is like. And there's a lot of room to grow into sort of narcissistic patterns of being on a stage all the time. These temptations I think are prevalent no matter where you're doing ministry. So I
Yeah,
yeah, that's good.
yeah.
What about the call to ministry? How do you think back on like a call? Was there a moment it was like, okay, this is it, like God struck me and that's it? How did that go down for you?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I always tell young pastors that that's probably the question you just asked is probably the most popular one that I've gotten.
Yeah.
And especially in the black church, there's almost a mystical thing that we attach to that,
Mm.
the call, that language that you use. So on the no part of it, I always just kind of had this intuitive, eerie sense that this is what I was going to do. The way my mom tells it, I'm the oldest of four. I was the only kid that she could really trust to go with my dad on his preaching engagements because she said from the time you'd be 2, 3 years old and you're sitting on the front row, legs dangling off the edge of the pew, and you're locked in. She says I was just mesmerized. I wouldn't make a sound. Dad didn't have to put me in children's church. I still remember the euphoria as a little child. Now, I'm sure there's some narcissism attached to this because the famous story mom tells me is when I was 3 years old. When she asked me what I wanted for Christmas, I asked for a microphone. Oh man, I'm a counselor's dream. Everybody else is asking for Tonka trucks or etch a sketch, whatever that thing was back then. I'm so Gen X right now. Um, and I wanted a microphone. So she gave me a little toy microphone. We had this old antique milk can. I had a Dr. Seuss book that was my Bible, and my first sermon they said was 2 words: "It's God, it's God, it's God."
Mm.
So there was kind of always that mystical sense, and I always knew that I'd get around to it. But at the age of 17, I had a classmate of mine who I felt compelled to share the word of God or share the gospel with, a guy named Craig Tarleton. I kept putting it off. He collapsed and died of a heart attack, of all things, at the age of 17. I remember sitting in his funeral and just going, "All right, it's time to get serious. It's time." So, while I always knew that was the moment when I really embraced and accepted the call, in the traditional black church, which I grew up in, when you felt called to preach, you actually set an appointment with your pastor. It's kind of a little bit of an interview. And if he acknowledged there's something possible here, he would put you up for what he called the trial sermon. And I preached that in August of 1990. Um, yeah, 35 years ago,
Wow.
August of 1990. And worst sermon ever. But the people were kind and gracious. And not long after that, I went off to Bible college, then seminary, and the rest, as they say, is history. So,
Yeah. That's good. That's good stuff. It's interesting the way that God kind of crafts our lives and builds us up into, what he has for us so many times. And those twists and turns, you just never really
yep.
can grasp too much. Yeah. So it's interesting, from a traditional black denomination is where you've said you've grown up and now into like, I mean, would you consider yourself part of, the evangelical movement kind of in general now? Would you use those words?
I wouldn't use the words,
Okay. Okay.
but conceptually,
Oh, yeah.
yes.
Okay.
When you think of Bebbington, the British scholar, his quadrilateral,
Yep.
yes. I just hate that the word evangelical has become politicized, right? So that
Yep.
it's almost like a junk drawer term that a whole bunch of stuff beyond the quadrilateral has gotten put in. I don't relate to that. It's sort of like, before evangelical, it was fundamentalist,
Yeah. Hmm.
right?
Right.
And for the very same reasons, they didn't like the connotations that fundamentalist um, was the trajectory it was headed on, and so thus the term evangelical. I think it's time that we look to another term because of the politicalization of it. But broadly speaking, um, here's the difference, though. The fundamentalist modernist controversy of the early 20th century caused a divorce in the church with the fundamentalists just going, "Hey, man, our relationship with God is just only vertical. Know your Bible." A lot of great Bible colleges and seminaries and Christian camps were started out of that. Praise God for that.
Yeah.
The problem is the fundamentalists. They didn't really exemplify a orthopraxy. They had orthodoxy, just not orthopraxy. That horizontal, love your neighbor, especially across racial lines. They didn't do that well. But on the other hand, there were the modernists who was like, no, it's just all orthopraxy, just love people. But because it wasn't rooted in solid biblical truth, it was just a moment of time until they fell into the abyss of heresy and liberalism. And of course, Jesus presents us with a more robust third way, which the gospel is both vertical and horizontal. So that's what I identify with. And that's what really I've tried to do in my ministry. In fact, one of my first books, A Cross Shaped Gospel, actually tried to speak to that it's quite possible to stay uber committed to the scriptures and to love your neighbor as yourself. In fact, that's the call for every believer. So that's what I want to be known for.
Yeah, I love that. And you expressed very similar feelings I have about the word evangelical. I've
Yeah.
been to evangelical institutions, Moody Bible Institute, Wheaton
Yep.
College, all these institutions that are big evangelical for sure. But yeah, it is hard to know how to kind of take that word.
Yep.
And you so going from a traditional, a black denomination into a more diverse spaces. Now, you're in a diverse space doing ministry in that. I have recently come into a diverse space. I've been at my church for about 4 years. It's a diverse
Beautiful.
community. I'd love to just kind of put a quarter in the machine and just let you talk about some of your experiences of coming into diverse spaces. I know this is like what you do. I know you could probably speak on this for hours easily, but what are some of the experiences you've had in diverse spaces? What are some of the values that you experience in diverse ministry?
Yeah, so I think two critical things happened to me along the same lines. When I started preaching, there was a whole bunch of people who reached out to me and gave me opportunities I should have never had, mainly solely because of who my dad was.
Mhm.
And so, in my late teens, early to mid 20s, I found myself on airplanes and speaking all over the place. And then I don't know why, but I just immediately start to notice, this is interesting. Why are my audiences either all white or all black?
Mhm.
Why is that? I remember one Christmas, in particular, the Christmas conference season, which is really popular among some Christian college campus organizations, and the same organization in the same city had two different Christmas conferences filled with college students, and I preached at both of them. One was all white, one was all black, and
Wow.
I'm just going, man, this is weird. At the same time, I'm in seminary, and my professor, Dr. Clint Arnold, who I just have to really bless him. He really just laid the foundation for my ministry. God really used him to lay the foundation. We're just going through the book of Acts, and I just remember being stunned one class that when Paul walks into town, he's got two questions. Where's the synagogue? Because I want to preach Christ to the Jews. But then he's not done. Where do the Gentiles hang out? In Athens, they point him up to Mars Hill. He goes to the Hall of Tyrannus. I mean, the Agora, which is the marketplace.
Yeah.
And what frames all of this is Romans 1:16. I'm not ashamed of the gospel, power of God and salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, not the Jew only, but the Jew first and also the Greek. Or I get to Ephesians chapter 2. Never really was taught this before I got to seminary, and the dividing wall of hostility and Jews, and then I go, wait a minute. I just remember just kind of raising my hand going, are you telling me that the norm of the first century church was multi-ethnic? Like, is I had never heard that teaching in my all black church coming up. I'd never heard it in Bible college. And so now it's like the conversion of, man, I'm just reading the Bible and I can't unsee this. I just can't. I've seen it and I cannot unsee this. And, the pragmatic thing for Paul would have for Paul to do, if he would have followed the church growth people, the early 20th century, C. Peter Wagner, Donald McGavern, and I don't say this to demonize them at all. God used them in incredible ways, but this whole idea of the homogeneous unit principle, which really the mega church was birthed out of, is extremely practical. And I get it. The idea here is, man, find your demographic, cater to your demographic.
Yep.
And that's the easiest way to do it. It's extremely pragmatic. I don't think it's biblical. And let me be careful to say, I don't think every church should be diverse. I think every church should look like its community,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So I want to be very careful because it's really easy to moralize your passion and to coerce everyone to do what you're passionate about. I just think the church should look like its community. And with the diversification of America, as we're on our way to becoming majority minority here in the next decade plus, I think the need for more first century, New Testament, multi ethnic, Jesus proclaiming churches is going to become more and more. So, that's what it was for me. I'm seeing a hole in the wall, and at the same time, I'm getting theological language that goes, "How did we miss this?"
Yeah.
Like like the multi-ethnic church isn't a new thing, it's a New Testament thing. Like, how did we miss that?
Yeah, Bryan, that's beautiful. I love that. That's such a good word. I wonder, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen to ministry in diverse spaces, if you have some off the top of your head?
Oh, of course. Dr. Corey Edwards, who's kind of our guru in this space, Jesus loving sociologist at
Yeah.
the Ohio State University. So arrogant, the. I think they've actually trademarked that. She talks about, she doesn't call them multi-ethnic churches. She intentionally calls them multiracial
Mm,
churches because she says when we talk about race, we're talking about how people have inherently been formed in the United States, and specifically the idea of race. Now we're dealing with economic and power inequalities. So I think there's some real realities that we just have to be able to speak to. And I don't think we talk enough in the spiritual formation discipleship space, that a lot of discipleship means deforming people until we can reform them
mm,
into the image of Christ. So when Tim Keller talks about whenever Paul walks into a town, or the task of every church planter is to be able to name and identify the unique idols in their missiological context. And you have to be able to speak to those idols. It's almost like you wield the Bible as a sledgehammer, not against people, but against the idols of their hearts. And then this whole idea that idols can never be removed, just replaced. So I'm both as a leader tearing down and building up at the same time. Um, so I've got to be able to speak to this on both sides, in a way that's not partisan, in a way that's not political. And that can be very frustrating
yeah.
because um, what I've discovered, and this, ethnic diversity leads to all other kinds of diversities, right? And so there's political diversity. Oftentimes there's theological diversity.
Yeah.
I've led churches where, you've got cessationists sitting next to charismatic, sitting next to Pentecostals, sitting next to I have no idea what you just said. And so, how do we take these very important but non-essential issues and still walk in unity, not uniformity, not but walk in unity with one another? That's not a box to be checked, that's a tension to be managed. And you have to constantly be able to speak to both sides. um, and I think a mark of spiritual maturity is the ability to even critique your own tribe,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And to have people constantly keep their eyes on Jesus. That's tough, man. That is tough. But I wrote a book that unpacks more of it, called Right Color, Wrong Culture.
Yeah.
Um, and anyways, it's really 1 Corinthians 9:19 to 23, where Paul says, "Look, I do all things by all means so that I might save some." And what allows him that kind of cultural fluidity is the eclectic nature of his relationships, which is why he begins by saying, "To the Jews I became a Jew, to those outside the law, those would be Gentiles, I became as one outside the law." So I think I've got to have diverse friendships. I
Mm.
need to be sharpened and challenged relationally that then allows me to be able to stand and pastor and shepherd and lead people into what Dr. King called the desired beloved community.
That's great. Yeah, I appreciate you delving into that. I love the just the experience, and having walked this for such a long time, doing this work. That's good stuff. Well, it feels like a perfect segue into your new book, Grace to Overcome. I'd love to unpack a little bit about that. Do you mind giving us kind of the background, like what made you write this book and kind of the basics?
Yeah, it's a unique book. It's of the 10 books I've written, I had the most fun writing that. The impetus for it is just a bit of a frustration of, man, why are they removing Black history
Mm.
from certain school districts? Why is there this movement in which we want to label Black history or sections of Black history as if it is woke or critical race theory or whatever? And I'm just going, man, at the end of the day, history is history. And, what if there was a way to connect key people and moments in Black history with the overarching theme of the gospel and the scriptures? And so I take 31 people, moments in Black history, and I connect it to scriptures that the Black church has always historically found to be meaningful. Now, b- and I get, if I'm a white person, I'm going, "Oh, Brian, isn't the very nature and the very project of it divisive?" And I would say no. Here's why. Um, I begin the book in the introduction, which I try to frame why I did this, talking about the time my wife, when we were in Arizona, she grew up in Arizona. We flew to Arizona for Thanksgiving. We get there. We all get in a car, and for 6 hours, she's taking us to the places in her childhood that she found meaningful, right? It's, the apartment complex she went to as a little girl, her little Catholic elementary school, her Catholic high school, the house that her parents and her family end up moving into. She also shared some painful moments. She talked about the divorce. We ate some really bad Mexican food at this Mexican food joint she used to eat at every Friday. And she says, "I know it's bad, but it means so much to me." We did this for 6 hours. And my kids were like, "Are you kidding me right now? Like, I'm so ready for this to end." And in that moment, I had to just gently correct them and say, "Yes, that might not be your experience, but mom is family. This is this is mom's experience. This is mom's history. And I don't think we can love mom to the degree in which we're called to love her if we ignore her story." It's the same thing. So one of my hopes for Grace to Overcome is really this idea of reconciliation. It's really this idea of unity. I I I don't want you to love who you think I am. I want you to love who I actually am. And in order to do that, I think you got to know your history. And again, I keep coming back to marriage. I think that's true of every marriage. The reason why I go to my wife's house for Christmas and they bring out the little scrapbooks and I hear a bunch of stuff that had nothing to do with me, and yet I sit there. I'm not even going to put this in a Jesus category. This is just called being a good human being, right? I sit there and I soak it in. It's because I love her, and this bit of history helps to foster empathy and understanding, and it draws us in closer with each other. The final thing I'll say about that is this idea of connecting specific Black people and moments to the arc, the meta narrative of Scripture. It's really how the Black experience in America has always been. The only institution we've ever really had that's been our own has been the church. And so from day one, the Black church and its commitment to the scriptures and a robust gospel has influenced everyone. I mean, if you know, I don't know what you think about Beyonce or the singing group Destiny's Child. They came out of the church.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most singing groups, most so the black church. So this isn't a novelty. This isn't a reach. Let me just reach for some people and connect them to the scriptures. No, this is how we've always rolled, and that bit of history is valuable.
That's good. I loved it. It's a beautiful book, beautiful stories. I have a question, and maybe you don't want to answer it, or I'm just going to throw out a question for you. So I've only recently been in more diverse community. So I've been hanging out at the church, but hanging out at people's houses. So I've been, some of my Black friends, I've been going to their house for dinner. And something I noticed was that in all of the houses that I visited, there were pictures of historical figures all around my friends' houses, right? And there was these stories that they could tell of all these people. Maybe even some people have like full genealogies with pictures. And I look at my white friends' houses, and I think it's very rare to walk into a white person's house in general and see pictures of historical figures. It's not something
Right.
that we do. And I wonder, here's my question. I don't know if this is fair or not, but do you feel like maybe white people just have a little more disconnect from their history because of how America sort of played out than Black culture does?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I want to just begin my answer by saying, culture is culture. There's great things about culture. There's not so great things about it. I think the real shame of being multicultural is not learning from other cultures, and I think that's a 360-degree process. So there's things I think that are beautiful about Asian culture and white culture and Black culture and Latino culture that we should always, instead of immediately critiquing and condemning, we should look to. When you talk about the Black community, and I would say Black and brown communities, you're talking more about people who see themselves communally.
Mm.
So we see ourselves as being interconnected, which is why, you know, um, an incident that we interpret as being um, racial violence from like a police person towards a Black person, that's why all of us are going to go to church who go to church across the country. We could be in Nebraska, we could be in New York, we could be in North Carolina. We're all coming to church grieving and silently hoping that the pastor is going to say something
Mm.
because we're connected. I don't get the sense that that is the same way for our white siblings,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Something tragic happens, maybe a bit of reverse racism. I don't get the sense that there is that same communal pain because I I think our white siblings, and this is not a moral statement. I think our white siblings see themselves more as a collection of
Yeah.
individuals than as an interconnected community, right?
Hmm.
And there's some beauty with that. And so when you talk about walking into a Black person's home and there are the images, um, yeah, that makes sense because we've always seen ourselves as being interconnected. The last thing I'll say about that is, isn't that the gift of suffering, right?
Mm.
I think the Black experience in the United States of America historically, whether we talk about slavery or Jim Crow, convict leasing. If you haven't read the book Slavery by Another Name, you should read that one. Um, one of the benefits of suffering is that it forces you to lean in more to God, more into others. And so I think what has enhanced that communal nature is just the experience of suffering here in America.
Yeah. Thanks for delving into that. I totally see that, the individualism versus the sort of communal nature. I just wonder if that experience or that cultural underpinning isn't the reason that many white folks that I know don't know a lot about Black history per se. I mean, it's American history. Like, this is the history
Yes,
of America,
yes,
right? This is
yes.
our history, right?
Could
And
not
so,
agree more.
yeah,
Yes.
and so to divorce those things
Yep.
doesn't make any sense. But I just wonder if there isn't a layer of that, of this individualism, where we don't even see ourselves connected to other American white folks. I'm saying don't see ourselves as connected to other Americans, even, and maybe are not as versed on American history in general, at least the finer points of it. Maybe these big swaths and these, big parts, but maybe not like the personal stories, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So, as you're talking, and yes, I do strongly believe that this book, Grace to Overcome, would not have been needed if Black history was presented in a very robust way in our schools as part of a bigger narrative,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Um, and yet, I'm trying to figure out what is, and maybe you can answer the question: what is the white version of a Jackie Robinson? And what I mean by that is the way Black people showed up. So I got a friend of mine, his dad just died. He lives in Texas, but he's a Dodgers fan because his dad loved Jackie Robinson
Yeah.
and never lived in Brooklyn. Um, but that's how he became. So there was this sense of, man, we're showing up, we're cheering, we're all in, we
Yep.
want you to succeed. People in Jackie Robinson's seat feel this pressure because they know I'm not just representing me. When I come to the plate, it's not just me standing in the batter's box. I'm bringing every Black person with me. And we can talk about whether or not that's fair or whatnot, but that wouldn't exist unless it was the experience of the minority, um, in a society that at that time, there was no real sense of equality.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I thought the same. Well, I think what you're sort of getting at is like who would white people put up on their walls in some
yeah,
respects, right? Like
yep,
I don't know who that would be
right,
necessarily. Maybe presidents you could think of. A lot of conservatives, especially, will harken back to like Reagan or
yeah,
something. Yeah, it's an interesting question because I personally I want to be connected with history, and there's
yes,
no reason I couldn't put up some of these figures, these civil
yeah,
rights figures in my house because it's part of the American history. It's part of the Christian experience as you get into in Grace to Overcome. Like that should be part of what I do. I don't
yeah,
know who those figures necessarily are. Maybe in the
okay,
white community though.
fascinating,
Yeah, yeah.
fascinating.
So maybe some commenters can tell us about maybe some of the people they have. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'd be
yeah.
interested. So yeah. So let's talk about what are some of the stories that sort of drove. I'm sure it was like, man, I have these stories and like somebody needs to hear these stories. So what were some of those stories that just like drove you along in this process of writing Grace to Overcome?
Yeah, so I mean, some of the like I said, I had a ball writing it. Uh, Jesse Owens, I think that's the first one. I just talk about 1936. It's well documented. He wins the 4 gold medals. Almost didn't win one in the long jump. But Jesse talks about one of the guys he was competing against who would go on to become a Nazi soldier, how he hugged him, embraced him, and how that gave him the strength that he needed to ultimately win the event. And then, he talks about a letter this guy wrote him right before he died on the battlefield during World War II, 7 years later. And it's a real tearjerker of a story where you go, man, this Black guy Jesse Owens, and being in this relationship with this Nazi soldier, only to discover Jesse made the whole thing up,
Yeah.
and he made it up back in the 1950s, as far as we can tell. But that's not the punchline. The punchline is not to say Jesse is a liar. The question is why? Why would he make that up? Well, what Jesse was starting to realize is, man, I I did this incredible world record performance, and yet I get back and I'm still living a substandard life. I'm having to race against horses and cars. I'm banned for life, by Avery Brundage, who was widely regarded to be a racist. And what Jesse was starting to realize was my performance is not going to get me the acceptance I want. And I go, I think that's all of us.
Yeah.
I think all of us in some way, shape, or form are leaning on certain things, the Bible would call them idols, to gain us acceptance. And I just titled it Jesse Needs a Hug. So Jesse makes up that lie to say if the worst of the worst, a Nazi soldier, if he will embrace me, then maybe my own country
Yeah.
will embrace me. And then I just tie that to the gospel where Jesus says, "This is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased." So that's one of my favorite ones. I was fascinated by the reality. There's a guy by the name of Jerry Lawson. He died a couple years ago. He is. If you ever play a video game, you have a black engineer from Queens, New York City, to thank for. Or if you ever go online, there's a guy by the name of Emmett McHenry. I think Emmett's still living, who created a complex code that allowed us to surf the internet. That's a black man. If ever you feel like it's getting cold and you go to turn on the heat in your house, there's a black woman by the name of Alice H. Parker. She's the one that we can thank for that. And then there's some not so feel good moments of Black history. Where I talk about how our government had the cure for syphilis, and yet just wanted to study the long-term effects of syphilis on poor black men in Macon County, Alabama, over a 40-year period of time, and watched them suffer. They finally settled, I think, for $10 million or something like that in 1973. The
Mhm.
last thing I'll say is there's a section in there where we can pinpoint exactly when the pendulum swung all the way, in which blacks went from Republican to Democrat, and it comes down to a 90-second phone call. So, fun aspects of history that, again, I wanted to tether to the gospel to dismantle any kind of notion that Black history is this ideological thing, and how the Black community had always seen a connection between their experience and the nation of Israel and the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I love that. There's so many figures as I consider myself somebody who knows a lot of stuff, and I like reading history and stuff. And then I keep coming across stories like even Jesse Owens. I mean, you know the name. I didn't understand the impact of that, and like should have been a hero, right? He's coming back and he like embarrassed Germany, who is this like
Yes,
superpower, and trying to prove the Aryan race is
yes,
superior. Jesse Owens embarrasses them, and like
yes.
to come back and still under I believe he's still in Jim Crow
Yep,
South, and
yep.
um, you know,
100%.
I just like there's these impactful stories that I just think are not told enough, and so I'm very appreciative of that.
Yeah, yeah. We are all beneficiaries of history,
Yeah,
and so again, each chapter it's pretty short, and I hope you'll find it inspirational. Some have approached it like a devotional because there's 31 entries, and some have said no, it's just a chapter book, and I just zip through it pretty fast. And however you want to approach it, obviously you have the freedom to do that. So
yeah, that's a wonderful thing. It's cool. I want to full circle it just here real briefly because you did get into the fundamentalist modernist controversy as Christians split into this fundamentalism and sort of modernist veins of like mainline Christianity versus what we would call evangelicalism. What's interesting is the Black church didn't have that split, right? And the
right,
Black church has held these two things way more in tension or together, I should say, what we would call fundamentalism and this vertical and this
right.
horizontal parts. The Black church has held together because they didn't go through similar structural things like the white church did. Yeah.
Well, I would actually say yes, you're right. Um, Although I think that has started to happen recently,
Okay.
sadly. But we didn't have that option
Yeah.
because what we discovered was no one was going to look out for our own in the era of Jim Crow
Yep.
but us, right? And so even, there's a wonderful book called The Warmth of Other Suns. I think it won the Pulitzer, written by Isabel Wilkinson. It's about the Great Migration. It follows three families. It reads like a novel, but it's completely true.
Mm.
One of the things she points out, and when I told my dad, you got to read this, and he called me weeping
Mm.
because it's absolutely true. During the Great Migration, and so my grandparents in the late 1930s, early 1940s, they leave Catawba County, North Carolina. they migrate up to New Jersey. So just imagine you leave your family, you're in this new place, you're there for economic opportunity. There's a sense of disequilibrium. And what many black churches did, Isabel Wilkinson said it, my dad verified it, was that these churches broke their ministries down by southern states,
Mm,
right? So instead of the small groups ministry in general, what you would see is the Mississippi auxiliary. They called them auxiliaries, the
interesting.
North Carolina auxiliaries, the Georgia, the Alabama. And it was their acknowledgement that, hey, you're coming up from down south. You need a sense of community. Let us not just connect you with people, but let us connect you with people who came from the same state you came and who can help you. But they realized we're the only ones who are going to be able to do that.
Mm,
Right? So it's not just good enough for us to preach wonderful exegetical sermons. We've got to also, there's got to be a stickiness to us. We got to provide robust opportunities for you to connect relationally in the context of the local church. We had adoption stuff that was set up. There were doctors and lawyers and dentists that you could get connected to right there through the local church. We didn't have time to just say, we're just going to preach the gospel,
that's right. That's
right?
exactly right. Yes.
And so I think that's another privilege, ironically, that suffering historically afforded the Black church.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for delving into that. So do you, I mean, just I guess briefly, you mentioned it. So do you see that turning somewhat in the Black church culture, I guess, in general is
Listen, you ready? This is the most provocative statement I'm going to make on your
love it.
podcast.
Okay. All right.
And I think Martin Luther King Jr. unintentionally killed the Black church. And the reason for that, it's a bit overstated, but you can draw a direct line between the decline of the Black church and the numbers. The
Mm,
numbers are out. There is, for the first time in African American history, this decoupling of the faith among Black Christians. And I think it's direct proportion to the economic opportunities we have. And so Dr. King, God blessed him, God used him to help bring about the legislative changes we need, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act. Well, now what happens is, I mean, we remember that 1970s television show, The Jeffersons,
yep.
moving on up to the East Side. So literally, the successful African American um, defines success historically by the geographical distance it removes them from their roots,
Mm,
right? And
yeah.
so the further I can get away from the hood, the further I can get away from the projects, the more successful so many African Americans see themselves. And so now what's happening is historic black neighborhoods are being gentrified, and gentrification is a very complex thing. Yes, there's an injustice element. You read stories of people driving up rents to get people out. Yes, that's unjust. But there's another element, and that is, Big Mama, who bought the brownstone back in the 1960s, early 70s for 20, 30, $40,000, can now sell it for millions. So she's cashing out. She's moving, from Harlem. She's moving from Oakland. She's moving other places. And so now we're seeing the dismantling of these historic Black communities. It's not
Mm,
your grandmother's Oakland. It's not your grandmother's Harlem and so many other places. And I think, well, not I think, I know that's wreaking havoc on traditional Black churches. What are they to do? Are they to stay? Are they to leave? Well, the places where their members are leaving to aren't traditional Black places a lot of
yeah.
times.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the underbelly to all the legislative greatness of Martin Luther King Jr. is it's created this African American diaspora where we are scattered now, and the local Black church is stumbling along, and I pray she succeeds. I pray she succeeds. But we've got a tough road to hoe.
Mm. Wow, there's a lot to think about there. That is, thanks for delving into that, Brian. That's yeah, that's good stuff, and it's hard to know. I guess I want to jump to what would you do, which is such a me thing to do. But what's there to be done? But yeah, there's a lot there. That's good. That's good. Well, are you okay jumping in? I have two final quick questions as
Yeah,
we
yeah,
wrap up. Yeah.
absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
So my first question then is, what is the strangest job that you have ever had?
The strangest job that I've ever had, I don't know if it's strange. I worked on a construction site when I was 14. Um, I'm sure my dad will not appreciate me telling the story because I was not of legal working age. But he was so worried that I would grow up this entitled, soft kid that he got this contractor at our church to give me a job, and he paid me under the table. That's what Reverend Crawford Loritts did for me. Um, I don't know if I'd call that strange. That was definitely a unique experience. I can't think of a strange job like out of the ordinary.
Yeah, I mean, 14-year-old doing construction feels pretty like that to me. So that's
Yeah.
great. I appreciate you jumping into that. Okay, so my final question then is, what is one piece of advice you would give to somebody looking to bring God's kingdom more into their work?
Yeah, so there's a great book that I'm sure you've read and you've referenced. It was really revolutionary for me many years ago, and it's a book that I really encourage my young adult sons to read by Os Guinness called "The Call."
Mm,
And the idea of the word vocation, which comes from the Latin vocatio, which is this idea of calling. And there's this professor um, at Biola University, PhD, Ariana. I forget Ariana's last name, but anyway, she talks about three levels of how we approach work. At the lowest level, some people just approach work as a job. Hey, look, I just need a paycheck. I just got to pay some bills. I got to pay something off. Um, and look, there is nobility in earning a wage. I mean, Paul's very clear: if a man doesn't eat, he shouldn't. If a man doesn't work, he shouldn't eat. But that's not the sweet spot. The next level up, Dr. Ariana says, from a job is what she calls a career. And that is me looking at what I'm doing as an opportunity for me to advance and matriculate up the corporate ladder. And listen, we should want to succeed and we should want to be honored for our work. But I hope you can see that's still a very me centered approach. The third level, Dr. Ariana says, and it's what Os Guinness wrote the whole book about, is learning to see our work through the lens of calling. And one of the things that, as I discipled my kids, and I got this from Howard Hendricks, famed professor at Dallas Theological Seminary. I said, all of life comes down to three questions from the time these guys were little. I'm talking taking them to elementary school. We had a weekly breakfast appointment at the Panera Bread there in Memphis. All of life comes down to three questions: who's your master? What's your mission? Who's your mate? And every week, I always pray Ephesians 2:10 over them when I think about mission.
mm,
And Ephesians 2:10 says that we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which he prepared in advance for us to do. It's a stunning verse because if I hear Paul right, he's saying there were good works waiting on you before you even got here.
yeah.
And was it Buchner who said um, that calling is the intersection between the world's greatest need and our deepest longing
Mm,
or satisfaction?
yep.
And that's the sweet spot,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm one of the few fortunate ones who I just feel like I'm always robbing the bank, man. I can't believe the paycheck hits. I would do what I'm doing for free, and I'd have to get a job to facilitate that. But that's how I try to disciple my kids, and that's how I think Christians need to think through that. And so when I see it as calling, and you talk about this, it dismantles the sacred secular divide.
Yeah.
I think in the age of AI, I think we're going to have to revisit a healthy, robust, biblical view of the trades. right? AI is
Agreed.
not going to be able to, at least I don't envision, give you new air conditioning,
Yeah.
right? So there is nobility in building a home and being a plumber. And what adds meaningful depth and satisfaction is when I see it through an Ephesians 2:10 lens. I was just reading yesterday about the building of the tabernacle. Exodus right around chapter 30, chapter 31, and God calls out specific individuals'
Yep.
names
Yep.
and says, I filled them with skill. Like, okay, Moses, you were here to lead the people out. Aaron, you had your place, but these individuals who are in the trades, I gave you the gifts and the ability to build something that people are going to be able to worship me, and that gives me great glory. And I think that's the robust vision we need to give our kids is, man, it's not just a job, it's not just a career. We want you to live into a calling.
Mhm. Bryan, that is a wonderful, wonderful words there. I greatly appreciate it. Thanks for making time for me. Thanks for the work, the book. It's all awesome. I appreciate you.
Grace to Overcome. Hope you pick it up. And if you have it, can you write me a kind review? So
We'll get them on it.
thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for hanging out and listening to A Theology of Hustle. Make sure that you like and subscribe, all the things, and follow me at Theology of Hustle on Instagram. My hope is that this podcast just encourages you in your work, whatever that may be. So until next time, get out there and hustle.